Welcome, everyone. On behalf of our entire congregation, I welcome you to the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Shenandoah Valley. I am Gloria Kelm, your worship associate for today's service. We gather together with our doubts as well as our convictions, with our fears and our hopes, with our failures and our aspirations, with our sorrows and our joys. Whether you are joining us today for the first time or you've been a member for many years, we are glad you were here. Whatever faiths you have known, if any, whatever your background, whoever you are, whomever you love, however you arrived here, you are welcome. We invite you to join our church community on Sunday at noon at our virtual post-service gathering for joys and concerns, which is followed by our coffee hour conversations in smaller breakout groups. The Zoom link is found in your UUCSV email. The purpose of the church is to encourage all who gather to grow more generous in spirit and in action. We hope you will consider making an offering after today's service through our website, uushenandoah.org, which allows us to exercise that generosity of spirit for this self-supporting church and its many ministries, which continue even when we are not able to be physically together. Our service today is entitled Becoming a Stonecatcher. Becoming a Stonecatcher congregation, and our key speaker is Claire Guthrie Gastanega, the Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Virginia. Ms. Gastanega will speak to us about the use of the U.S. justice system to control and imitate people of color, in effect, serving as the new Jim Crow. Allie Houston will also help with the service. Myself and Allie participated in the book club last fall that read the book, The New Jim Crow. Now let us enter into this time of worship.
In an interview with NPR's Michelle Martin on October 24, 2020, Alicia Garza, the co-founder of Black Lives Matter, reminds us, "Too often the stories we tell about racism are stories about good people and bad people, people who deserve good things to happen to them, and people who create their own devastating circumstances. These stories, of course, are racialized, gendered, and classed. Rather, racism is a set of rules designed to allocate resources and power unequally. It is embedded in institutions like schools, workplaces, and government, and it is also embedded in culture via the stories we tell on television or the stories we learn in our places of worship about why some people have and why some people don't. Racism gives people who are designated as white power and privilege over those who are not designated as white. Those rules are further established and popularized by culture to entrench the rules that are written in policies that govern our lives. Racism is systemic. In an interview with Krista Tippett, Brian Stevenson, the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, picks up this thread, challenging us to become stone catchers. Stone catchers, he explains, are people and institutions who intercept the stones thrown by the righteous at the so-called undeserving, ignoring the teachings of Jesus. Today, let us consider the ways we can become a stone-catching congregation and work to end systemic racism in all of its forms.
Now, as Allie and I light the chalice, let us all say together from our homes the words for lighting our chalice. In the light of truth and in the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, to share. And I invite you to join with me also as we say our covenant. Love is the spirit of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, and to help our neighbor. To these we covenant one with another. Now, please join me in a moment of silence as we hold in our hearts all those in our nation and the world who are struggling and suffering from the challenges and losses related to the COVID-19 pandemic and its economic and educational disruptions. Let us also remember all those who have been unjustly imprisoned and are plagued by racial and criminal injustice. Blessed be.
The following reading is from Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. This book was read by a few UUCSB members last fall following the death of George Floyd in May 2020. Once a person is labeled a felon, he or she is ushered into a parallel universe in which discrimination, stigma, and exclusion are perfectly legal, and privileges of citizenship, such as voting and jury service, are off limits. It does not matter whether you have actually spent time in prison. Your second-class citizenship begins the moment you are branded a felon. Most people branded felons, in fact, are not sentenced to prison. As of 2008, there were approximately 2.3 million people in prisons and jails, and a staggering 5.1 million people under community correctional supervision, i.e., probation or parole. Merely reducing prison terms does not have a major impact on the people in the system. It is a badge of inferiority, the felon record, that regulates people for their entire lives to second-class status. For drug felons, there is little hope of escape. Barred from public housing by law, discriminated against by private landlords, ineligible for food stamps, forced to check the box indicating a felony conviction on employment applications for nearly every job, and denied licenses for a wide range of professions. People whose only crime is a drug addiction or possession of a small amount of drugs for recreational use find themselves locked out of the mainstream society and economy permanently. No wonder then that most people labeled felons find their way back into prison.
Sing in my heart all the service.
Claire Guthrie Gastanaga, our speaker this morning, has been the executive director of the ACLU of Virginia since 2012. Ms. Gastanaga got her law degree from the University of Virginia and has received many awards in recognition of her civil rights work. She has argued cases in the Virginia and United States Supreme Court and served as a senior advisor to the leadership of the Virginia General Assembly, holding positions including Chief of Staff and counsel to the Speaker of the Virginia House. Today, Ms. Gastanaga will speak to us about mass incarceration of people of color in Virginia and things we can do to help promote racial and criminal justice.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to be with you today. I wish I could be with you in person. This darn COVID-19 and the pandemic has thrown a monkey wrench into so many of our plans. But I hope you're keeping safe and now double masking so that all of us can weather the storm and come out the other side healthy and with a renewed commitment to make a difference in our communities. I'm very happy that you all are interested in criminal legal reform. I wanted to talk today a bit about our work in that area, but I want to start by telling you a little bit about who the ACLU of Virginia is and what we stand for. We strive to be the premier guardian of civil liberties and a recognized champion of civil rights for all Virginians. For nearly 100 years, over 50 in Virginia, the ACLU has made a profound difference in the lives of clients and community members, as well as historic contributions to our country and our state. Now more than ever before, we've turned to the ACLU, and our communities have turned to the ACLU to fight back against the unprecedented new attacks on civil rights and civil liberties. The ACLU is committed to pursuing policy changes at the local and statewide levels in Virginia that work to achieve racial equity and the advancement of civil liberties and civil rights for everyone. We're committed to ending racist policing, reducing the number of people who are incarcerated in Virginia, increasing access to quality mental health care and medical care for people who are incarcerated, ending sex and gender-based discrimination at work and in our schools and communities, and securing a constitutional right to vote for everyone. Virginia has a very significant issue of discrimination and disparity in our criminal legal system, and you've been reading about the genesis of that in the new Jim Crow. It is a fact that Virginia is a Jim Crow state, and unfortunately, there are vestiges of Jim Crow still alive in our Commonwealth today. We have an incarceration rate of 779 people per 100,000 people. And the reality is that incarceration rate is quite different for Black people and white people. It's 2,418 per 100,000 for Black people and 466 per 100,000 for white people. Our rates of imprisonment have grown dramatically in the last 40 years, and people of color are overrepresented at every stage in our system. We have two things that have come together, unfortunately, in Virginia. One is the increased racialization of policing, and the other is the 1995 no parole law, and which imposed longer sentences on everyone who's convicted. The racial disparities then get magnified in light of both of those trends, and they reflect themselves even all the way to the right to vote, which I'll talk about in a minute. Black people are more likely to be arrested, held in jail pre-trial, convicted of a crime. They're likely to get harsher sentences and face higher barriers upon reentry. Racial disparities just simply exist at every level of the criminal legal system, and the unfortunate problem is, and you've seen that in reading the new Jim Crow, that the system is actually working as it was designed to work. It was designed to create unparalleled burdens on Black people in Virginia and across the country. Let me give you one example of the devastating impact of the disparities in our criminal legal system on our Black and brown communities. Let's look at marijuana enforcement. Black people are 3.4 times more likely across the Commonwealth to be arrested for simple possession of marijuana these days than white people, despite the fact that white and Black people both use marijuana at about a 13% of population rate. That 3.4 is a statewide average. We have communities in Virginia, like Hanover County, where the rate is 20 times more likely if you're Black, and in Arlington County, where the rate was 8 times more likely to be arrested and prosecuted for possession of marijuana than if you were white. Black people are also, according to a study by the Joint Legislative and Audit Review Commission here in Virginia, to be convicted 4 times more likely than white people on marijuana charges. So more likely to get arrested and more likely to be convicted. And you know what? Legalization and decriminalization hasn't really moved that figure much in the states where legalization and particularly decriminalization have taken place. In Virginia, for example, our General Assembly touted the quote unquote decriminalization of marijuana last year, but the fact is that it remains illegal to possess marijuana in Virginia. All we've done is change the penalty. So the incentives for police to engage in disparate policing haven't changed. They still can pull somebody over on suspicion of marijuana use and give them a civil penalty instead of a criminal penalty, but that stop often leads to other charges as people are asked lots of questions that they don't stand up, that they don't refuse to answer. One of the state police guys once said to me, "Could you please teach people their rights so they won't consent themselves into jail?" It is a reality that we, and particularly Black people in Virginia, face untold reasons to be cautious and to be overly courteous, if you will, to police people when stopped for fear of the violence that might come to them if they did something else. And we'll talk about what we're doing to try to fix that as well in a second. And in addition, the last example I'll give you about, marijuana enforcement as an example of the racially disparate law enforcement system and criminal legal system we have, is that Black people has always borne the brunt of the war on drugs across their communities. And it's important as we look at our criminal legal system and talk about reform to do that through a racial justice lens and center the communities most harmed by systemic racism and social inequity. If you want to see an example of how we're trying to do that in the context of marijuana legalization, take a look at our action hub on marijuana legalization on our website at acluva.org and get involved. We're trying very hard with respect to marijuana legalization, not only to revisit and reform the idea that marijuana should be illegal, it shouldn't be, it should be legal, but also to ensure that as we legalize, we do so in a way that's very conscientious about the harm that's been imposed on Black and brown communities and people, and that we legalize right, that we do it with a social equity, racial justice lens, that we make sure that the market that is created for legal marijuana is open and becomes an economic engine for those communities, and that we also ensure that the monies generated, the revenues generated by the taxes on that new legal market are reinvested in the communities that have been harmed. You can think of it as reparations, and it really would be and should be a reparative investment to fix the harm that we caused by creating a system that criminalized marijuana use. So what are we doing? I've talked a little bit about what we're doing in the area of marijuana, but what else are we doing at the ACLU to end our over-reliance on incarceration and reduce racial disparities in the criminal legal system? Well, on policing, we're trying to make police as accountable for harming people as any of you would be if you hurt or killed somebody. We want to reduce the number of people getting caught in our criminal legal system, and that means we need to work together to reimagine what it means to talk about public safety and what we define as a crime. The fact is, the biggest root cause of crime is what we choose to call a crime. We need to choose, instead of criminalizing poverty, homelessness, substance abuse disorder, and mental health issues, we need instead to choose to invest in preventive measures like mental health care, housing, and better schools. By investing taxpayer money in programs that support Black and Brown communities, we will not only reduce the need for police, but we might reduce, and we hope we can reduce, the number of deadly interactions that result from over-policing in Black neighborhoods, schools, and streets. With respect to the pretrial period of the criminal justice system, the reality is if police see you commit a misdemeanor, they're not supposed to take you to jail. They're supposed to issue a summons and release you unless they think you're a danger to yourself or others. You won't respond to a summons if it's given to you, or you won't stop doing the criminal act that they've seen you commit. But in fact, the police more often arrest and take into custody people of color, and particularly in your part of the state, people they perceive or believe might be people who have immigrated here from other countries. So what do we need to do with pretrial? Well, we're working with the Pretrial Justice Coalition to advocate that everybody should have a lawyer with them when they first appear in response before a magistrate after they've been taken into custody. We're looking to change the standards for bail setting so that everyone who's presumed innocent before they're convicted is released pending trial on their own recognizance without having to pay any money, and not held at all unless they're objectively seen to be a physical danger to others in the community. In addition, we want to bring transparency to the system. We really don't have enough data about what's going on. We just know from incidental data that there are serious issues that are about the disparity in the way the system works, and particularly the reality that people who have less money experience the system quite differently than people who are wealthier. We're also working with the Virginia COVID-19 Justice Coalition and the Stop Solitary Condition to address the often deplorable conditions at the Virginia Department of Corrections and in our jails. We want to create meaningful and independent civilian oversight over the Virginia Department of Corrections, because the people being held there, they're among the most vulnerable in our communities and in our society. They have no ability to protect themselves from arbitrary, capricious, and indeed violent behavior. We need objective oversight of the system in order to protect the people in it. And we're also supporting a bill that would bring more transparency and have brought more transparency to the solitary confinement policies of the Commonwealth. And we want to, and we are, and we sued to try to release more people from prisons and jails who are COVID vulnerable and who don't represent a real risk of harm to the community. That effort has not been as successful as we would have liked it to be, and advocacy by people in community is really important to pushing the governor and your local jail officials to take seriously the need to get people who are vulnerable to COVID and not dangerous to you out of your prisons and jails. Finally, one of the most important things we're working on, and we all need to work on, is a guaranteed right to vote. Everyone in Virginia who's 18 and over should have a right to vote that's guaranteed to them, that government cannot take away for any reason. There is no public safety reason for taking someone's right to vote away, even when they're convicted of a felony. And we all have to recognize that the only reason we have felony disenfranchisement in our Constitution was that it was seen as a very viable way to assure that the General Assembly at the time could reduce the number of Black people, at the time only Black men, because women didn't have the vote yet, but could reduce the number of Black people who were qualified and able to vote. In fact, after the 1902 Constitution, with the literacy test, the poll tax, and the felony disenfranchisement provision was enacted, the number of people who were eligible to vote, who were Black, fell from well over 100,000 to less than 30,000. People who are held in jail on either misdemeanor charges after conviction or while they're awaiting trial on other charges are eligible to vote. That's right, people in jail are already eligible to vote. And you know what? When we had our excuse-based absentee ballot system, which fortunately we've gone to no excuse, but when we had an excuse-based system, one of the 20-some excuses that you could give is I'm in jail. So we've facilitated even absentee voting for people in jail. Extending the right to vote to everyone means, yes, people who are in prison, as opposed to just in jail, also will be able to vote. Now, let me give an example of what that means in real life. It is a felony, and you'll appreciate this because there are a lot of poultry providers, operators, and manufacturers and purveyors in your part of the state. It is a felony to steal a $5 chicken in Virginia. It is a misdemeanor to steal a $995 iPhone. If you steal the $995 iPhone and you're convicted of a misdemeanor, you don't lose your right to vote. If you steal a $5 chicken and you get convicted of a felony for doing so, you lose your right to vote under our Constitution permanently unless the governor chooses to give it back to you. Look, the people who are most impacted by the unjust system that we're talking about deserve to be able to have a say in what the policies are that govern that system. So the right to vote, as Martin Luther King said, give us the ballot and we'll fix the rest. The right to vote is fundamental to making the changes in the system that I know you share my desire to see. Well, let me answer a couple of questions. I know I've gone on a bit, but I wanted to answer a couple of the questions submitted in advance, and then I'll close. First, you asked the question about what the real impact of Jim Crow is now today. The new edition says the most egregious is the rules that hamper people who've been convicted of felonies from successfully reintegrating into society. From my perspective, taking away the right to vote permanently, and even if there's automatic quote unquote restoration after you've served your time, is one of the biggest barriers, and we need to eradicate that. But you can add on to that there are any number of jobs for which you cannot get a license if you have been convicted of certain felonies. And there are also conditions on parole that can interfere with your ability to get a job, like drug testing that can be done only during the day and is done without warning. So you can never plan for it, and you may be working a job in which you have very little control over your time. And if you have to keep taking the afternoon off to get your drug test because you're on probation or parole, that can make it very difficult for you to maintain your economic status in the community. There was a question asked us about our ongoing relationships with the NAACP and other organizations opposing racism. We are a national organization, and we work nationally with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and a whole host of other organizations on questions of race and anti-racism, and frankly, on issues as broad and as encompassing as the House resolution that's studying reparations for Black people that is being considered in Congress. Locally in Virginia, we work in coalition with many other organizations on lots of different issues. The Stop Solitary Coalition I talked about, the COVID-19 Justice Coalition I talked about. We work in collaboration with the Reproductive Rights Coalition that works on abortion access. And we have a Right to Vote Coalition as well, just to name a few. And there are many opportunities for you to engage with organizations that engage with us. And we're grateful for having that scope of support and collegiality and collaboration. And finally, let me just say, in response to the question about the reality that the people most likely to be killed in interactions with police are people with developmental disabilities or mental health issues. This is a huge, huge problem. Our police are not the right responders in circumstances in which a person either has is in the middle of a mental health crisis or has a significant developmental disability that means that they'll have difficulty appreciating what's happening to them. We have to reimagine how we address public safety. We have to get the right people involved in responding in those circumstances. It doesn't have to be the police all the time. It can be social workers, it can be people working for the community services boards. This is a big issue that I hope that you'll look further into and become a part of helping to address. I want to close and challenge each of you with a passage from a speech my father gave. I used this the other night in a presentation I did to our members. He was accepting an award from the Federally Employed Women's Program, and he quoted and paraphrase the Greek historian Thucydides. And here's what he said. This is my dad. In Periclean Greece, where democracy began, the historian Thucydides was once approached by a citizen with this question: "Sir, when will justice come to Athens?" The great man, Thucydides, responded without hesitation, quote, "Justice will not come to Athens until those who are not exploited are as indignant as those who are." My father went on to say in his speech, "I ask today in this, the world's greatest democracy, quote, when will justice come to America?" And the answer, he said, is written in the heart and the mind and the will of each of us. If we are honest, the answer is, quote, "Justice will not come. It is here only if and only if I will take the first step." So I want to thank all of you for choosing to spend some time with me today as one of your first steps, and encourage you to engage with us as another step in the direction of bringing justice to America. You can find out more about doing that on our website at acluva.org, or follow us on social media, ACLUVA. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to the possibility of being able to see you, actually be present with you someday soon. Thank you.
As the flame of the chalice is extinguished, let us say together from the words for extinguishing our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of our community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again.
Wishes of discomfort for the new year. May you always have a restless discomfort about easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships, so that you may seek truth boldly and love deep within your heart. May you always have a holy anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people, so that you may tirelessly work for justice, freedom, and peace among all people. May you always have the gift of tears to shed with those who suffer from pain, rejection, starvation, or the loss of all that they cherish, so that you may reach out your hand to comfort them and transform their pain into joy. May you always have enough foolishness to believe that you really can make a difference in this world, so that you are able to do what others claim cannot be done. Blessed be.